Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and we're back here today with another edition of Against the Odds. So last week on our Against the Odds poll, Hidetsugu's second Rite came in first place by a pretty decent margin. So we are building around Hidetsugu's second Rite in Modern, and we're playing a deck that I'm calling the Pingining. Because it's sort of like one of those old B horror movies, sort of like The Birds or something, where these little benign creatures that you normally wouldn't think twice about all of a sudden gang up and go crazy, and altogether, they actually are pretty scary and might even kill you. So that's kind of what this deck does, but it's doing it with pingers, so that's why instead of the birds or something, it's the Pingining. Anyway, let's talk about the deck. First off, we have the namesake card, Hidetsugu's second Rite. So this is a 4-mana instant, and it says, if target player has exactly 10 life, Hidetsugu's second Rite does 10 damage to that player. So, 95% of the time, when our opponent is at any life total other than 10, Hidetsugu's second Rite is literally a 4-mana instant that does nothing. Absolutely nothing. If you cast it and your opponent has 12 life, or 19 life, or 4 life, it has no effect whatsoever. On the other hand, if an opponent has exactly 10 life, it does everything. It wins the game on the spot for only 4 mana, which is actually pretty powerful. So the trick of the deck is getting an opponent to exactly 10 life. And I thought about the different ways of doing this. You could play like a mathy burn deck, but I didn't want to play a burn deck on Against Odds because in a burn deck, if we're playing lightning bolts and rift bolts and lava spikes, we would win without Hidetsugu's second Rite. We wanted a deck where we really were dependent on Hidetsugu's second Rite to win the game. Another option was Sorin, which can set a player's life total to 10, but there's still a lot of holes in that plan because to cast both the Sorin and the Hidetsugu's second Rite in the same turn is 10 mana, and all our opponent has to do is lose or gain a life if we try to split it up over 2 turns, and it ruins our entire plan. So I decided to go with the Pingining plan because I figured if we take our opponent's life total down 1 at a time, it gives us a lot of control over when they get to 10 life, and then we cast our Hidetsugu's second Rite to actually put their life total to 0. So we have a million pingers. Essentially, almost every single card in our deck, apart from Hidetsugu's second Rite, and one other card we'll talk about in a minute, are pingers in one way or another. So this slide, these 3 cards, ping our opponent only. So we have 4 Goblin Fireslingers, 1 mana 1/1, you can tap it to deal 1 damage to target player. We have Scorch Rusalka, a 1 mana 1/1. Sacrifice a creature, and Scorch Rusalka does 1 damage to target player, so it can always sacrifice itself to do a damage, or it can sacrifice other creatures. We have Keldin Marauders, a 2 mana 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, it does 1 damage to target player, and when it leaves the battlefield, it does 1 damage to target player. But it has Vanishing, so it only stays on the battlefield for 2 turns. You remove a Vanishing counter each upkeep, and when the last one's gone, it disappears. So it pings once when it enters, pings once when it leaves, and if we're lucky, we can get in 1 attack with it before it vanishes away. So that's our first set of pingers. They only hit our opponent's life total. Then we have a whole bunch of creatures that not only can ping our opponent's life total, but they can also ping our opponent's creatures if we need them to. So these ones, even though they're only doing a little bit of damage individually, if we can team them all up like a flock of birds, it's not impossible that we can take down like a Tarmogoyf or something. So we have 4 Grim Lavamancer, probably the best pinger. 1 mana 1/1, you can pay a red and exile 2 cards from your graveyard, and Grim Lavamancer does 2 damage to a creature or player. We have Mog Fanatic, a 1 mana 1/1, seems to be a theme of the deck. Actually, I think every creature in our deck is a 1/1. I just realized that. 1 mana 1/1, you can sack it and it does a damage to a creature or player. Spark Mage Apprentice, a little bit more expensive, a 2 mana 1/1, but when it enters the battlefield, it does a damage to a creature or player. Then we have 4 Volshak Sorcerers and 4 Cunning Spark Mage, essentially the same card. 3 mana 1/1s, or actually Cunning Spark Mage is a 3 mana 0/1, so I guess that breaks the 1/1 trend. That can tap to do a damage to a creature or player, and they both have haste, so you can use them right away. So the idea with these cards is we will cast them over and over, a bunch of pingers. We will ping our opponent's life, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, And then by the time we ping them down to 10, we should have 4 lands. Hopefully a Hidetsugu second Rite. Cast the Hidetsugu second Rite, boom, we win the game. So that's the idea. Whether or not it'll work, who knows? I like that we can ping our opponent's creatures with these cards if we need to. Seems like we'll be really good against things like Birds of Paradise, since we can take those down. But against bigger creatures, we don't really have a way to deal with them, and our plan is relatively slow. It's going to take a few turns to ping our opponent all the way down to 10 life, so I don't know. Now, one of the problems I was running into is what happens, especially in game 2 and 3, once our opponent realizes what the plan is, that we're trying to ping them down to 10, and then resolve a 10 damage burn spell, and we get them down to 11, and they crack a fetch for a shock land and go to 8, and then how do we win? We can't resolve our Hidetsugu second Rite, or we can, but it won't do anything. So we needed to have a way to get our opponent back up to 10 life if they get down to 9 or 8 or 7 or 6 or 5 life. So how do we do that? Well, the key card in the deck, the only non-red card in the deck, Fiery Justice. Fiery Justice is the sweetest card in this deck. So it is Naya colored, a red, a green, and a white it costs. It's a sorcery, and it says Fiery Justice deals 5 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or players, and target opponent gains 5 life. So the sweet part about Fiery Justice is as long as there's a creature on the battlefield, either on our side of the battlefield or our opponent's side of the battlefield, we can make our opponent, for 3 mana, gain any amount of life between 1 and 5 of our choosing. So if our opponent's at 6, Fiery Justice will get them to 10. If they're at 9, it'll get them to 10. At 7, at 8, anywhere in that range, it'll get them into 10. But that's the plan. We can use Fiery Justice to get our opponent back up to 10 life if they manage to get themselves down below 10 life. So that's essentially all the non-land cards in the deck. We have the 4 Fiery Justice, the 4 Hidetsugu second Rite, and a million pingers that hopefully can work together to form something a little more powerful than they are separately. Mana base wise, fairly basic. We have 10 fetch lands, we have several shock lands, and 3 mountains. The Sacred Foundries and the Stomping Grounds exclusively there to work with our fetch lands to be able to cast our Fiery Justice, so we can search them out with our fetch lands. Also, our fetch lands fuel our Grim Lavamancer, which is helpful. And then 4 Ghost Quarters. Gotta talk a minute about Ghost Quarter. Ghost Quarter in this deck, it's not just, oh, our opponent's playing Tron lands or creature lands or something. Ghost Quarter is really essential to this deck because one of the deck's biggest problems in winning with Hidetsugu second Rite is fetch lands. Fetch lands are a really easy way that almost every modern deck has to manipulate their own life total. So if our opponent, once they realize what's happening, just leaves a fetch land sitting on the table, it is essentially impossible for us to get them to exactly 10 life. They can just let that fetch sit out there, and whenever we get them to 10 and go to cast our Hidetsugu second Rite, they crack their fetch, go down to 9, and fizzle our Hidetsugu second Rite. So Ghost Quarter is a way that we can preemptively force them to crack their fetch lands, so they can't just sit there. And it's also a way to deal with pain lands, which happen to see a little bit of play in Modern, because people want to exile or activate Eldrazi Displacer or cast Thought-Knot Seer. So it's a way to deal with pain lands and to not let our opponent ruin our entire plan by sitting there with a fetch land on the battlefield. Sideboard-wise, we only have 4 different cards, but they're all there to answer specific problems. Pithing Needle takes care not only of fetch lands, which is one of the deck's biggest problems, that's the whole reason that I'm very worried this deck won't work, but also it takes care of Spellskite, which is another one of the biggest problems. Because if we get our opponent to 10, go to cast our Hidetsugu second Rite, and our opponent has a Spellskite on the battlefield, even though they can't redirect Hidetsugu second Rite to the Spellskite because it only targets players, they can pay 2 life with the Spellskite, try to redirect it, and that brings their life total down to 8, and then it fizzles our Hidetsugu second Rite. So Pithing Needle is there to deal exclusively with fetch lands and with Spellskite. Destructive Revelry is there mostly to deal with Spellskite, but also to deal with Leyline of Sanctity or those type of cards that can keep us from targeting our opponent with our pingers and our second Rite. Skullcrack is to make sure our opponent can't ruin our day by gaining life. Something like a Thragtusk, when our plan is to ping our opponent 1 damage at a time with those pingers, gaining 5 life for the Thragtusk, or even 2 or 4 life with the Kitchen Finks. really sets us back a long ways. So Skullcrack helps keep that from happening. And then the 3 Leyline of Sanctities are mostly there so we have a little chance against combo decks. Something like Scape Shift or Ad Nauseam has to be able to deal with the Leyline of Sanctity before they can combo off and kill us. Otherwise, I thought those matchups would be 100% unwinnable since we just don't really have a way to interact with them quickly. So that's the deck. As far as the odds, I don't know. This is one of the odder decks I've ever built and played on against the odds, so I really have no idea. I think it'll depend a little bit on the matchup. Obviously, if our opponent is playing small creatures that we can ping with our pingers, that works in our favor and keeps us alive long enough to hopefully resolve a Hidetsugu second right. Also, I think we are better in game 1s when our opponent probably has no idea what's going on. But if once they see a Hidetsugu second right and kind of know what the plan is, that's when spell skites and leaving fetch lands on the battlefield and just really easy ways for them to hose our plan. So we might be in a position where we literally have to ping our opponent all the way down to 0, and that sounds like a lot of work. 1 damage takes a lot of pinging to get someone's life all the way to 0, 1 at a time. So I don't know, I'm going to say that we win. Man, I think we can steal some game 1s when we get people to 10, because I think we can get them to 10 easily, and they aren't expecting the second right. So I'm going to say that we do well in game 1s and maybe win 20% of the time. So maybe half the time on game 1s, but then a much lower percentage of the time on games 2 and 3 when we got to deal with a opponent who is in the know about what our plan is and the element of surprise is gone. But I think it should be fun and it should be interesting, and there will probably be some hilarious moments. I would really love to, I don't know, shoot down an Oblivion Sower with pingers. That would just be so hilarious. Or even a Tarmogoyf would be pretty funny. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Anyway, make sure to check out the website, mtggoldfish.com. That's where you'll find the article for this Against the Odds, the voting for next week's Against the Odds, and tons of other awesome stuff. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to click the subscribe button and the like button that are about to pop up on the bottom of your screen, so it'll keep you up to date on all the latest and greatest in video content from mtggoldfish.com. Anyway, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoy the Pingining, and I will talk to you soon.